Out of nowhere, we've had a lot of really good games in 2025. Got your AAA games like Battlefield 6. You also have some major indie successes like Hollow Knight Silksong, Hades 2, Blue Prince, and kinda out of nowhere, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I don't think anyone expected this game to be such a massive hit. This game has like the second highest Metacritic from this year. It's hard to believe because this game doesn't really have the recipe for a mainstream success. It's a very French JRPG that's a fusion between Persona and Dark Souls. Two of my favorite games ever are Persona 5 and Dark Souls, so it feels like this game should be made just for me. And yet, after playing it, I was a little disappointed and honestly feel kind of like a crazy person looking at the responses. By the time this video comes out, this game is probably already won Game of the Year. Now, I'm not making this video just to dunk on the game or be a contrarian. I just found myself constantly getting frustrated as I played the game. The super fast version of this video is that Expedition 33 has a fascinating world and a great story and interesting characters. The visual design is top notch, and in a lot of ways the gameplay feels truly fresh. But I'm constantly being pulled out of the experience because the Dark Souls pieces don't really fit very well with the Persona pieces, and it feels like the game is obsessed with wasting my time. I'm not going to spoil the story of this game in this video, but you should probably just check it out if you're interested, because I will be showing and talking about gameplay from throughout the game. I'm just a guy, this is my critique, so I don't want to turn you off of the game before you give it a chance. Also, this video is going to be a little bit longer, so you probably should get cozy. Okay, with all that preamble out of the way, I want to start out by talking to you guys about Nakey Jakey and the Peloton. Here on YouTube, we got all kinds of mans talking about games, and one of the more prominent ones is Naked Jacob, more commonly referred to as Nakey Jake. He uses an exercise ball and a lot of silly jokes and references to hide some real serious game. And if you haven't noticed, I'm like a bike and some melanin away from a copyright strike. But anyway, Nakey Jakey has a video on FromSoft's game design that I really like and want to talk about. The overall goal of this video is to talk about how good Elden Ring is and how it kind of breaks from some of FromSoft's game design, but he starts out by talking about the general design of Souls games. He talks about how the beating heart of Souls games is the combat. And the second beating heart of Souls games is the exploration. Dark Souls doesn't give you a map or detailed instructions to go on, and so instead you actually get to feel like an explorer where you have to chart your own path and master the space. This can feel super rewarding as you get to see how all these areas connect to one another, and a lot of the storytelling of the game comes through the visuals of the different spaces. There's not long cutscenes or anything, so the experience of being in an area is very core to the story and experience of the game. I gotta stop saying experience. And the corpse running system, which is when you die, you drop your souls on the ground, which are basically XP, and you have to run back and get it without getting shot by an arrow or randomly falling off the map and losing it forever, and then quitting the game. Corpse running system adds a real level of difficulty and intensity to the exploration, because you actually have something to lose. Now, I didn't bring this stuff up to randomly glaze Dark Souls or Nakey Jakey. The devs of Expedition 33 cited Souls games as one of their core inspirations. I think it's one of the two pillars that the game stands on. We'll get to the other one in a minute when we talk about the bike. But anyway, borrowing from Souls games seems like a really good idea. In Claire's, we're literally playing as explorers going through a mysterious and dangerous land trying to figure out what's going on. On paper, these Souls-like exploration elements should be a slam dunk, but it's kind of blocked by the JRPG elements, and it turns a lot of it into a massive pain. Expedition 33 doesn't have corpse running, so when you die, you don't really lose anything, and so you lose out on all that intensity and danger that you should be feeling from the setting. The only thing you can really lose is your time. And that's going to come up a lot. You should probably take notes. It'll be on the test. While Expedition 33 doesn't have a map, and it does borrow things like bonfires from Dark Souls, there's no overall connected world to learn and to explore, so it doesn't feel very rewarding to have to figure out how things work. These are your father's RPG zones where you go through an area, you beat a boss, and then you leave. So the lack of the map is just kind of annoying. But we'll get into all that in a lot more detail in Chapter 2. For now, we got to talk about the Peloton, or this budget version of a Peloton. Look, I wasn't gonna spend $1,000 just to have a nice version of spin class. Whatever. Just like games, Peloton rides have pacing. You turn this knob down here to increase the resistance and simulate changing gears. Makes it harder to ride, but you generate more energy. The classes guide you through increasing and lowering resistance over the course of a ride to set a certain pace. Games are the same way. They guide you through lower and higher difficulty and effort levels to give you forward motion. In general, on the Peloton, you got two kinds of rides. You got hit rides, and you got endurance rides. Hit rides are very high intensity in small bursts. You do max effort, and then you have a chill period. Dark Souls games are very much paced like this. You have very difficult combat encounters that are very intense, broken up by exploration where you can chill a bit. There's lingering pressure from corpse running, but the game breaks this up with things like bonfires, gear management, builds, all the stuff that's not involved with hitting a guy. On the flip side, you have endurance rides, which start out pretty slow, but we gradually increase the resistance until you're actually at a pretty high intensity. We might stay at peak intensity for a while, for a few minutes at a time, but then we bring it back down again. This brings us to the other more obvious pillar of Expedition 33, the JRPG. JRPGs are paced like endurance rides. You get to a new area, and you fight some smaller enemies. They're not very challenging. Then, as you progress through the area, you get a few higher friction activity. Like when you level up and you get some new gear, you have to go into the menus and spend a while tinkering. We'll get to that, that's like Chapter 3, but in JRPGs, gear management and character building tends to be moderate to high friction. Because unlike in a Souls game, you might be in these menus for 20-30 minutes trying to make adjustments and build your team. You eventually reach a boss, which makes you actually have to lock in and try in combat. Because otherwise, these enemies are just mooks for you to mow down. After that, you get some story stuff, some cutscenes, so you can catch your breath a bit. This is the crux of the problem with Expedition 33's game design. On paper, these design decisions all make sense, but I can't play a game on paper, I gotta play it on my screen. The game mechanics themselves, that they've taken from Dark Souls and from JRPGs, do kind of mix, but they're paced very differently, and so it makes the experience feel very uneven. They brought over a lot of the high-intensity stuff from combat, the parrying, the dodging, the ways that they made the defense more interesting, but they also brought over a lot of the high-intensity stuff from JRPGs. The in-depth character building, the strategy, all the stuff that has you sitting in the menus for a long time. Both of these are fine on their own. Hit rides are tolerable. I mean, they're great. Endurance rides are great. But when I've been sprinting for 5 minutes, I don't want to immediately go into climbing a hill for 20 minutes, where I have a nice half-an-hour cooldown before immediately going into another hard sprint. Look, the parry system this game has is really cool. The idea of making defense in a JRPG active instead of passive is a great idea. It's amazing in Dark Souls, and I like it here at first. But then the game's like, you like parrying, right? How about you parry 5 consecutive attacks so that you can earn the right to get one turn? Then go back to parrying another 5 consecutive attacks. What, you want to use all that JRPG strategy that you spent 30 minutes in the menu setting up because you got 2 different weapons and 2 different equipment drops just in the last hour? Because the hard enemies in this game are more about your ability to play the rhythm game than it is about the JRPG strategy. I might want to take a little break to coast a little bit, but no, you gotta turn up the resistance again and climb this hill and then do a sprint and then climb a hill and then do a sprint. All right, now that we've all cooled down and had a bit of Gatorade, I want to talk about the most interesting part of Expedition 33, the world. This is the part of the game that they really, really nailed. This game's genre is a JRPG, a Japanese RPG, but it's French. It's very French. Maybe a little too French. The art style is unique, and the setting details are brilliant from the very first chapter. Really, though, the prologue of this game really nails the vibes they're going for. Beautiful vistas, melodramatic storytelling. The image of the paintress in the distance is great visual storytelling. And the opening levels of the game really hit on that feeling of being out of place on the continent. The party washing ashore in this picturesque hellscape with these weird Nevrons attacking them, chef's kiss. Now, as we settle into the game itself, we have to start moving around in this game world. The exploration element of the game takes cues from both of its parents. The game is broken up into locations, we'll just keep it generic and call them zones, on the world map. That's pretty standard JRPG stuff, but the zones themselves are a little wonky, which we'll get to in a bit. The world map feels a bit off because there's no fast travel. On the world map, you travel around between different zones and you fight enemies. Feels very Soulsian, Souls-like. A living world map can be cool and immersive, but in this case, it feels a little awkward because I never have access to look at the whole picture. But no, seriously, it's too easy to lose track of where you have and haven't been because there's no markers. The game also does the thing which, look, game devs, we should have abandoned this a long time ago. You have to unlock moving faster on the world map. And for the first part of the game, you're just ambling around in slow motion, which makes you not want to explore, because again, you're just spending time. There's no danger. They also have this whole Metroidvania thing where you have to unlock different modes of traversal to unlock different areas of the map. This is not new to JRPGs, so it's cool, I guess, but there's so much ground to cover that's annoying to have to wait till the later part of the game to go back through a bunch of respawning enemies just to cross a patch of water that you couldn't cross at the beginning. These are features and ideas that do work in tandem if we're just trying to mash 2 games together, but they lose track of why these features existed in the first place. The exploration in Dark Souls works for a lot of reasons, but the big one is corpse running. It makes it an actual challenge to get from point A to point B, and it incentivizes you to find shortcuts and to figure out ways to deal with different enemies in different areas. It feels very rewarding. But even though we brought around bonfires and health flasks and no map from Dark Souls, we left corpse running. So if I get lost on the map, I don't really lose anything but my time. I want to see if there's something new over there, so I go over and check, and it says I'm too low level. So let me get out my physical notebook to write down that I need to come back here later. And sometimes you explore a new area and you find out that it's the volleyball minigame. This busted fusion frenzy minigame makes you bounce around a ball using the wonky out-of-combat attack mechanic. And what is it with that move? When you run into an enemy in the open world or in a zone, you can start the combat with an attack. If you just run into an enemy, they get to go first, but if you hit them with your attack, you will get to go first. This, again, is a mechanic that's taken directly from Persona, one of their main inspirations. These games, back on the PS2, did the same old janky swing at an enemy to start combat thing, and it was kind of booty in those games too. It makes you think a little bit more about your positioning and the space you're in, but it doesn't feel very rewarding. So much of the design and the iteration on Dark Souls games is about making it feel good to smack a guy with a big old sword. Expedition 33 has like 75 game mechanics, so I'm not that bothered that the movement and the platforming isn't very good. But then don't put it in the spotlight by making me have to position to swing pixie dust at a guy. The Persona games straight up drop this feature. Instead, you just press a button and your guy teleports in and does an attack. It looks flashy, it gets the job done, and I don't have to freaking throw pocket sand at a guy that misses half of the time. The world and the exploration has some more quirks, and we're gonna go through them by looking at one of the most beautiful settings in the game, Cyrene. This place starts out beautiful. The music is hitting, and the colors and the designs are all a perfect microcosm for what makes the design of Expedition 33 work. It's colorful and beautiful and creepy all at the same time. The ribbon dancers that are trying to lull you into a false sense of security before you get eliminated dovetail very nicely with the aesthetic. The aesthetic nails what the game's going for. I can smell the croissants from here. And when you start playing, it works. You hop on one of these floating platforms and it slowly takes you throughout the stage so you can soak in the scenery. This is some great JRPG execution, right up there with the greats of the genre, like Final Fantasy, like Persona. But when we start to play the actual stage, we see some of the issues creep in. Because unlike Persona or Final Fantasy, or even like Blue Dragon, you don't have a map. So we get to pick a direction and set off. The enemies you fight are very much in theme with the level. Like, you got these dancers that got flowing, mesmerizing movements, and that is reflected in gameplay. They dodge almost all your regular attacks, so instead you have to shoot them with a gun. As an immersion technique, I love it. Chef's kiss. But as a gameplay mechanic, it's a little bit shakier. We'll get into it a little bit, but just know that having to shoot enemies slows you down. These fights take a little longer than usual, even if they're not too hard. All this is fine, though, until you reach another one of these glide pads. You got options. You can keep going, or you can get on the pad. Up to this point in the game, if you get a fork in the road like this, you get a campfire. So you can check out one direction, come back. If you find a new campfire, you can always fast travel back, all that stuff. But there ain't one here. And there isn't one if you trot a little further down the path either. So I, as a very smart gamer, said, there must be another campfire on the other side of the pad, so I can go over there, save, start playing around, and then come back if I need to. So you ride the pad, which has an unskippable animation that takes a little while. You get there, and there's another fork in the road with no save point. Now, this is where I know a lot of people would say, the game shouldn't have to explain all this stuff. You should be able to figure out by playing. You want them to just put yellow paint over the way you're supposed to go? Sure, but the area is pretty big, and I'm going to want to explore all of it, and it all kind of looks the same. So wouldn't it be good if there was some way for me to at least tell where I've been before? Objection! Couldn't you use your eyes? Hold it! The beautiful design of this place is supposed to be hypnotic, but it also means that everything kind of blends together. The immersion shouldn't get in the way of being a game that's fun to play. Wandering around in Dark Souls makes a lot of sense because, you know, there's like danger around every corner, and all these little interactions are at least draining you of resources, if not maybe killing you. But this is also a JRPG, so the regular combat interactions just like aren't very hard. And even if you run out of flasks, you can just cycle through different team members to preserve HP. And these enemies, which start out very cool and very immersive, start to turn into speed bumps. The dancers are not hard, but it takes up time. This game doesn't have the enemy variation of Dark Souls, so as you backtrack through the area, you're gonna be fighting against like 2 or 3 enemies. I remember when I first played through this area, I followed the pad down, I went on for a little while, and then ran into a mini-boss. Then I just kind of sighed and put the game down for a day. I was just annoyed. This is a pacing failure. This is not what we want to be doing. Once again, it's this awkward amalgamation of a Dark Souls dungeon and a Persona dungeon at the same time. A Dark Souls dungeon has you fighting through these sometimes connected areas, and each area has a few combat challenges. You find some loot, and you start to get used to different types of mob. But ultimately, these areas are actually pretty small. Like, if you take Stormvale Castle from Elden Ring, there's lots of mini-bosses and side tangents and secrets for you to discover. It takes a while to find out how the different pieces connect. But you're meant to go for a little while, fight through the hard challenges, and then reach a site of grace, and then you can decide if you want to take a break or keep going. And once you figure it out, this castle's, like, really short. Instead of taking hours, you can clear it in about 10 minutes. But a Persona dungeon is much slower and much grindier. Each individual fight is actually quite easy. The real challenge comes in preserving your resources. To use most of your character's abilities, you have to use SP. SP can't really be restored easily, so you're meant to preserve it. You get a few level ups throughout the dungeon, just a few. You also get 1 or 2 item drops, and we're talking like +5 to attack sword. Not like this endless loot parade that we have in Expedition 33. In Cyrenaica, we get the uncomfortable combination of the two. You have no map and you're exploring the world, but the enemies are also just speed bumps. And it's not even speed bumps like Persona, because there's no SP, so there's no reason for you to not blast away with your best skills. It makes every fight feel kind of samey. There's no reason to not just stick to the formula that works every time. But then we go back to Dark Souls mode when we find a mini-boss, because they can usually only be beaten if you learn their specific rhythm game, dodge, and parry sequence. Seriously, the Chromatic Greatsword Cultist who's here in Cyrenaica is not too bad, but he does have a thing that most mini-bosses have, a lot of damage. If you don't learn his moveset, most of your team members are just going to get one shot. I do not mind a challenge, but your strategy is tested a lot less than your ability to play defense. Every single fight here is kind of involved. Most of them are not challenging at all, and most of them you can't actually lose, but they are all kind of time-consuming. And if you don't manage the defense aspects properly, you're going to end up losing team members and losing time. And you can't just win via better strategy or builds. Sure, if you super over-leveled for some reason, you could probably blow this stuff away. But most of the enemies in this game are designed to force you to interact with the defense system. Like we said with the dancers, they have very high dodge, so you have to use shots rather than your abilities to hit them. But if you use that, you're not going to likely have enough resources to actually kill all the enemies in one turn, so you always have to go through at least one cycle of dodging and parrying. This is definitely an intentional design, but also intentionally hurts the pacing of the game. Cyrenaica is a good example of an area that I was really enjoying, but then started to get more and more frustrated with as it has more and more pacing issues. There's a few of these places where this fusion of game design really does not work. We just covered exploration, but I also want to talk to you guys about looting and leveling. And combat, but that's chapter 3. Looting. The looting system is a very weird one to get wrong. One of the real bright points to a Souls game is the loot. You go down some random dark hallway and you find a cool item. Maybe it has a cool description if that's your thing, but really, I don't need a description to tell me why a giant slab of metal might be a cool weapon. Rings and talismans give you cool stuff to build around, and the armor system is pretty solid. The big thing I want to key in on is while there's a lot of loot dropping all the time in Souls games, you can safely ignore most of it. You get a new armor set and you can go to the menu and find out in about 30 seconds if it works for you. Is it cool looking? Are the stats good? Will it make me roll around like a fat man? That's pretty much all I need to know. It's very similar for weapons. Is the number good? Does it look cool? If the answer is no, it just goes to rot in your inventory forever, or until you see a YouTube video that tells you it's secretly OP. In Persona, loot is pretty sparse in dungeons. Most of the equipment and loot comes from the other part of the game, where you're playing that other video game where you're playing as college students pretending to be high school students. And most of the loot is just consumables. And when you do get a weapon, the game will literally tell you, this weapon is better. Would you like to equip it now? They don't take up a lot of your time in the dungeon because equipment management and character building is very time consuming in a JRPG. They don't want to hurt the pacing of the dungeon. If they handed out 3 weapons that are all special snowflakes in the same dungeon, we'd be here all day. Except that's what we do in Expedition 33. Every 10 minutes or so, you get a new weapon. The weapons are cool, and they'll change your entire playstyle like in Dark Souls. Like this sword, Stalem for Mael, is like the coolest thing ever. At the start of your turn, it'll burn you, which sounds bad, but it has a bunch of benefits for being burned. When you're burning, you do more damage, and you get all these different burn-related synergies as you level it up. And you can tailor your whole build around it. There's all these burn-related skills and synergies, and you can build the rest of your team to provide burn as well. This is really cool. And then it happens again with a different weapon. And again. And again. You go through 2 fights and suddenly you have a new weapon for somebody else. And this one requires you to make an entirely different build just to test it out. If you just want to test it out, at a bare minimum, you got to go in and change all of your skills over to synergize with your new weapon. And they did this cool thing where the weapon damage all scales with different attributes. That's awesome, except for it makes the level up system 5 times more complicated. We have so much stuff dropping each fight that it somehow makes getting loot boring. Leveling. Leveling is something that's supposed to be a highlight in an RPG. Usually, levels come pretty slow, or at least meaningful levels do. In Persona, you level up a good amount of times. You level up roughly 8 times a dungeon. When you level up, it plays fancy music, number goes up, then we're done. We move on. Every 3 or 4 levels, you get a new skill, but there's no picking. It's like Pokemon. There's also this whole complicated catching and fusion system for your main guy, but they very intentionally separated it from the main gameplay. You have to go to jail to access it. The minute-to-minute gameplay is not mixed with the character building. This works well to build anticipation for a level up. In 2 levels, your shiny Ryuji's gonna get a new skill. It's cool. Dark Souls leveling has more stuff going on, but just barely. You spend souls to level up, and that gives you a point to put into a stat. That's it, you're done. Items have stat restrictions, so it makes you anticipate leveling because you might be able to get to use this new sword, da-da-da. but it's very easy. Leveling up is a quick, fun thing you should do after beating up a bunch of guys on a ledge. So why did we somehow combine these two things into this time-consuming system in Expedition 33? When you level up, you get attribute points like in Dark Souls, almost exactly like Dark Souls, because different items use different stats. But unlike in Dark Souls, there's not like requirements that you're looking to reach. Items just scale differently with different attributes. The Strelum has damage scaling based on defense and luck, but for the Varumum, however you say that, you scale based on luck and vitality. So every time you level up, you get to choose between picking stats for the weapon you're using, or the weapon you want to use, or just because of the stat itself. And for some reason, we have 5 separate stats, which also point to another set of stats, because it wouldn't make sense if the only way to make your defense higher was to put points into defense. You also could put points into agility to get your defense to be high. And neither of these things are the same thing as vitality. Now, despite all the stuff I've been saying, I want to make it clear. I like complexity. I think it is fun to think about builds in games. But when you get 3 stat points every level, and you have a whole party of characters all leveling up, and they level up often, and the stats that the individual character wants is changing based on their weapon and their other equipment, it's too much. It's too much going on. Way too often in leveling up, I would just throw points into whatever the weapon stat is. Whatever. You can always redo it later. Whenever I finally felt like spending 30 to 40 minutes, I could stop and reallocate all of the skill and attribute points to be something better. You also have skills. Skills are cool, like in every RPG. Remember how we look forward to leveling up to get them in Persona? Every character has a whole skill tree. The skills themselves, they're amazing. They're very cool, well designed. Like Lune has the super cool skill Fire Rage. It does a bunch of fire damage to all enemies, it ramps up every turn, but you can't do anything else while she's doing it, and if you get hit, you get stunned. This sets up some good risk-reward. Am I confident that I can dodge or parry everything this enemy can do? Do I need Lune to do other stuff this fight? These are good questions for your player to have to ask, so the skills themselves are not the problem. But the skill tree itself just kind of turns into a pain after a while. You'll rush to get the first set of skills that look cool to you and that'll fill out your character's skill set. Then the differences and the advantages between these start to get a little bit granular. Like Mael's whole gimmick is stance changing. So each skill she has a certain stance. Some are designed to transition between stances. Some are much stronger in certain stances. So once you set up something that works, getting new skills becomes very annoying because now you have to make sure that the new skill works with everything else you already have working. Like I really want to try out Pyrolyze, but to get there I have to unlock all the other burn skills. And then I gotta make it work with the rest of the kit, making sure that I have enough cheap skills, balance out the expensive skills, and have skills that can build up more action points, and that I have skills that will put her into the right stance and get her back out of the stance if I need to later. And I do all of that before I find out if this would even work well or be fun to play with. The consequence is that you end up just stacking up skill points rather than actually using them because you don't feel like redoing your entire skill build. Then we get to the king of Tedium Island, the most annoying feature in the game, Pictos. When they introduced Pictos, I was excited. It sounded right up my alley. All Pictos do 2 things. They'll give your character a stat boost, like plus 100 HP, and they'll give your character an additional ability, like healing on parry or just like straight up taking a second turn. They're just like rings in Dark Souls, or talismans in Elden Ring, or accessories in Persona. You get it. This is a pretty common game feature. But the cute little wrinkle they throw in for Expedition 33 is that your characters can permanently learn the ability part of the Pictos after they use it long enough, so they don't have to use up the equipment slot anymore. They just have to use these Lumina points for each different one. Capiche? Seems simple, seems like a great way to add some depth to the game. But this is the wrong type of depth. See, this system would probably work fine if Pictos just gave you the ability part, the Lumina, and got rid of the stat point part altogether. This would still be a fairly complicated system where you have to like cycle Pictos through your whole team so they can learn the important ones, and to manage a point system between what they have equipped versus what they're spending Lumina points on. You still have to go through and reshuffle all of your Pictos and all of your Luminas pretty much every time you get a good one, but it wouldn't be that bad. It's still kind of a pacing killer to go 2 combats, and then the game tells you that you found a new Pictos you have to go look into, and then one of your characters learned one of the other ones, so it's time to go into shuffle mode again. After a while, I just started ignoring the messages and shuffling things around every hour or so. It takes like 15 minutes to shift these around between all of your characters. But the part where we go too far, and we find out the 2 designs are not on speaking terms, and we have 2 Christmases, but they're very awkward, is when we look at the stats that each Pictos gives you. Because the game is scaled so that your characters get a significant portion of their stats from Pictos. Like just adding this 1 Pictos to my Lune doubled her HP. It's just not possible to keep up with this scaling based on level up stats. So not only am I managing multiple stats every level up to go with weapons, making sure that my skills go with the weapons, but I also have to cycle all the good Pictos throughout my whole team so I can make sure that everyone has the good abilities, but also make sure that everyone still has good Pictos at all times so that their stats aren't too low, because otherwise they don't do anything. Or so that every fight doesn't devolve into a 20-minute match of Dance Dance Revolution. We've talked a lot about the menu portion of this game, but we haven't really talked much about the combat. For all the funky designs and flashy visuals, great music, and plot twists, the thing that really got people's attention for this game was that it was a JRPG with active mechanics like parrying. Can you believe it? Parrying? Alright, I'm not hating on parrying. It does get kind of overglazed online. Like, did you see that there's a game where you could parry a nuke? But it is doing this game a disservice to boil down its gameplay to parrying. Combat systems in E33 do not do a whole lot new, but it does bring together a lot of systems from other JRPGs, and it does them pretty well. You got these quick time events that happen every time you use a skill. Shout out to Lost Odyssey. It's like one of the last JRPGs that just hasn't been re-released ever. But this game did the same thing on attacks. You had to line up this little ring to do more damage. But the ones in Expedition 33 are clever. They're better than this. Now, at first, I thought these were kind of unnecessary. I mean, after a while, you don't really mess them up very much, and you can even just turn on auto quick time events. So why are they here? But I think they're here more to improve the game feel than they are to be mechanical. It just feels good to time some of these, especially on the slower moving animations. Sometimes even catch myself miming along with the motions as I press it. It's a good touch. The game also gives you a gun. Although they don't call it a gun. I think they just say shots. Again, they just kind of stole the gun from Persona 5, but I'm totally okay with it because this does it a lot better. It's just way more interesting in this game. In Persona 5, you just like press it to shoot a bunch. In this, you're looking for weak spots to shoot. Look, I'm a sniper. Beyond the basics, the strongest part of this game's combat is definitely character variety. Every single character plays completely different from the rest, and I applaud the game designers for it. In most JRPGs, the characters just kind of fall into rough archetypes. You're like, yeah, this guy swings a sword. These people do magic, healing. But in this game, every character is very specific. Mael has her stance changing, and that influences every single move she has. Lune has stains. You can see them right here on her clothes. Every spell generates a stain, and every spell also spins stains in a certain way to improve them. It's very cool, and it's complicated in a good way where I actually think about how I'm supposed to use these spells in order. CL has this really cool mode changing thing that's not stance changing, it's different. Some of her moves set up Foretell and some of her moves spin Foretell, and then you get to go into Twilight, wake me up inside, I can't wake up. I'm sorry. And then you do crazy damage and stuff. With CL, it's really cool to try to set up for multiple turns so you can have this nice explosion of damage. And you got Gustav with his lightning arm, which charges up. Okay. Kind of not as interesting as the rest of the characters, but that's fine. And these other ones we'll just leave behind the curtain for now to be safe, but they're cool. They're cooler than Gustav. Sorry, bro. So everything in combat is working pretty well in concept until we get to the enemies. Then we start to see the real issues. Starting with... Who's that Pokemon? It's Claire. Alright, this game has an elemental typing system where attacks have different types, like fire, and ice, and light, and dark, and void. It's like Pokemon, sure, but also like a lot of JRPGs, elemental typing is done all over the place. Elemental typing is always kind of a shaky concept because at its core, it's just rock, paper, scissors, and rock, paper, scissors is not a very good game. Also just noticed while editing this video that this rock, paper, scissors b-roll has 3 people playing. Somebody come get your mans. Y'all cannot be this bored. Especially if you only brought your rock and your paper to a tournament and there happens to be a lot of paper mains around. But for real, it's spiky in ways that are a bit frustrating, like the fact that it really encourages trial and error. Like if you look at this guy right here, what do you think he's weak to? Now, if you look real close at the top of his head, there's like a little bit of red there. So maybe you'd say ice. Maybe. Also dark for some reason. But this man, I mean, nothing on his body or his design tells me that he should be weak to electric. I mean, it's really just par for the course for regular enemies. You're supposed to try some things out and then remember what their typing is later for the future. But for bosses and mini-bosses, it's annoying because you don't really have anything to go on. The typing stuff is really interesting when you're thinking about your own team's composition. Like, Lune is built to have the most versatility with the elemental system. She can run like everything besides light and dark in the same kit, and so she's really good for setting other people up. And you can use something like Elemental Trick to use 4 elements at once for trying to figure out what a guy might be weak to. CL has a lot of cool light and dark mechanics, like she has some weapons that set all of her damage types to dark. It's pretty interesting. As they weave together, you start to see some of the real strategic strengths of this game. It's very good. Then we run into an enemy that's immune to all dark damage, while I have CL using the weapon that turns all of her damage into dark, and it makes me want to grimace. Okay, when we're thinking about elemental typing, I think we should go back to the granddaddy of elemental typing systems, good old Pokemon. Plenty of people did it first, but there's a few things that make it kind of work okay in Pokemon, better than in some places. First, there are very few type immunities, and those are fixed. Ground is immune to electric. Makes sense. Steel is immune to poison. Makes sense. Fairy's immune to dragon. Makes sense, you know? But for the most part, they stick to resistances. Water resists fire. It's not an immunity. You don't feel like you're being actively held back from using fire types. It's just not as good. As we get later into the game in E33, we start doing the really fun thing where a lot of enemies just have multiple damage immunities. Party members become completely obsolete in certain fights. If you decide that you want to use CL against the enemy that is immune to dark attacks, you can bring her. If you're willing to spend 30 minutes to go and swap out her weapon to something that would be better versus him, and then swap out all of her skills to match with her new weapon, and also redo her entire stat points. So you got to go refund all of her stat points and re-put them into stats that now fit with her new weapon. And then you also probably need to go back outside of the zone to camp so that you can upgrade the new weapon that you picked to be at the right level and change your pick dose. The other thing that Pokemon does pretty well, for some Pokemon, is giving you options for moves. Gengar is a ghost type, which means that he's weak against dark, but they gave him multiple fighting and fairy moves so that he can still hit dark types. But in Expedition 33, characters are pretty limited in the amount of damage types they're allowed outside of Lune and that man. So if you have this carefully crafted team with cool synergies and strengths, and then you run into an area with a bunch of enemies who are fully immune to ice damage, then you might feel like you want to Gramage yourself. Now, the most annoying part is that focusing on elemental damages and resistances just isn't very fulfilling or fun. Like, am I supposed to feel like a genius because I see a fire weak enemy and then I switch my entire team to do fire damage? Me showing up to a rock convention with paper. Got him! There are ways to make elemental typing a little bit more dynamic so it feels more fulfilling. Like in Metaphor, Metaphor, when you hit an enemy with an elemental weakness, you get an extra action. Same thing goes for your enemy. When you hit someone with an elemental immunity, it ends your turn right there. This can be very annoying, yes, but it brings like a massive level of strategic depth to the system, and so granting and removing elemental weaknesses is actually like an important factor to the game. Here in E33, I guess I feel smart for finding out this boss is weak to dark, and so I pull out my Evanescence album before I fight him again. Another major hurdle in this game's combat basically just comes down to boss and mini-boss design. Bosses are the highlight of Souls game, and they're a light in JRPGs. Honestly, JRPG bosses can vary a ton between the reason why you play the game and the reason why you drop the game. But boss design is very interesting because it's meant to bring out some of the complexities of the combat system and to force you to actually think and engage and have a coherent strategy. Most normal combats, you can just brute force if you need to. Without bosses, a lot of your skills feel useless because you never actually have a reason to pull them out. This game takes a cinematic approach to bosses, so I'm not going to spoil any of the late game bosses, like the main story ones or anything. They're usually pretty well done. But the rest of the bosses just have like recurring problems that epitomize the issues with this game's design. The first thing I want to mention is the damage cap. Up until you unlock one specific Pictos, the max damage you can do is 9,999. Sounds like a very big number, but even extremely early on, the bosses have way more health than this. It's annoying because it just means that there's no actual way to speed up a lot of these bosses. Even if you know exactly what they do and you know exactly how to beat them, you're going to have to slog through it because they capped a very specific amount of time you're supposed to take, so you got to go through the defense system. This is just kind of annoying because up to a certain point in the game, a ton of bosses just take a long time because there's no way around the damage cap. They're not actually very challenging, but they take a long time, so it kind of feels challenging. The majority of your time in the fight is spent pressing the dodge or parry button, and the biggest strategic choice you have is, do I push the dodge or the parry button? They also do the brilliant Elden Ring thing, where a lot of the bosses just have a bunch of delayed attacks. I think the most egregious, worst designed encounters in this game aren't even the hardest. They're against these shopkeeper guys. They have attacks that hit super hard, but they have like no wind up, and the only way to figure it out is to just play against it a bunch of times and get hit. There's not like a sound cue or a good visual cue for me to look at. You just have to memorize it. There are two philosophies for designing attacks and dodgy games. The first is that all attacks should have a certain feel and rhythm so that even if you're seeing it for the first time, you can learn to dodge it by feel. You can see this a lot in Hades 1, where after a while you really can dodge just about everything every time because it all feels right. I can get a feel for the speed of the attack and then dodge it on reaction. The second is the design attacks that are intentionally misleading, so you have to learn them via repetition. No one is fighting Margit for the first time and dealing well with this cane attack. You just kind of have to get hit a few times. You get clapped a few times until the timing sticks. Now, both these designs can exist in the same game, and the second philosophy isn't necessarily bad. But when you use the second philosophy and you're being misleading, you're spending a little bit of your player's goodwill. Because not only do they need to accept getting hit until they figure it out, getting hit doesn't really feel earned the same way. On top of that, if you regularly rely on your players just memorizing the timings, it gets more and more frustrating as the game goes on because you have to keep track of more and more individual timings. You're fighting a lot of the enemies from the beginning of the game, even all the way to the end, and you still have to remember exactly how long they pause before they jump at you. I bring this up in the boss part of the video because while the regular enemies have this, it's more manageable. Most of the bosses in this game have long, bespoke attack chains that you just have to memorize or else you're not going to be able to play. And while in some ways I think it's challenging that Gross Tet will just bounce for 10, 15, 20 seconds, it's not super fun to spend most of the boss fight just pressing the parry button on a very specific sequence. And so many of the bosses do this exact same thing, where they will teach you an attack sequence, and then they'll make it longer, and longer, and longer, until you reach the point where you're like, okay, cool, I'll parry 15 times in a row for the right to have my turn again. I don't think it's cool for part of the challenge to be getting tired of pressing the button. Again, it feels like I'm playing a rhythm game where there's no music playing, so I don't really know where the notes are supposed to go. The final worst thing that a lot of the bosses in this game do are turn off the fun. There's a surprising number of bosses in this game that straight up turn off the fun mechanics. Now let's start out with one of the better handled version of this, the Bergion. You see him for the first time pretty early into the game. He has a move where he'll eat one of your party members. Now, as an aside, I do wish the game would give you some kind of indicator when a boss is using an undodgeable move, because for my first few times fighting this boss, I just thought I had the timing wrong. No, he eats a party member and you can't do anything about it. That party member is straight up out of the fight until you manage to stun him. Now, does this make the fight harder? Yes. Does this introduce some strategic depth? I mean, maybe. I guess if this is how you learn that breaking and stunning bosses is a good thing to do, cool. But I mean, you're supposed to do that with every boss. Now, is this challenge fun? Not really, because I put Seal into my party because she's fun to use, and now she's just turned off. Or what about Chromatic Ramesseur, whose whole gimmick is that you don't get a turn unless you parry enough times in a row? Okay, it's cool in concept, but when you have to parry over and over and over and over and over again, it just gets old. It just gets old very quickly, and there's not a lot of strategy or thought in it. This whole boss is just like Guitar Hero with the sound turned off, and that's an idea concocted by a madman. Or you got, I think it's Serpentfair, which is a really cool optional boss with very interesting attacks. Interesting attacks except for like the variable time laser. Okay, would it be too much to ask that the laser attacks that look the same in the same attack sequence would have the same timing so that I could just like learn it, rather than the second one being randomly delayed a little bit? But this boss's whole gimmick is that it takes away your AP, which is what you use to do skills. There are ways around this, mainly skills that generate AP via defense, but I have to ask, why do so many of these bosses just rely on turning off the interesting parts of the game? If you take away skills from Expedition 33, I'm literally just pressing the attack button. The combat system without skills is just pressing the attack button when it's my turn. Now I get it, this boss does some creative things. If it absorbs too much AP, it explodes. Cool. Now, good luck dodging or parrying the explosion the first 2 times you face this boss because, again, bespoke timing, hope you got it right. But then the boss is weak. That does not make the boss constantly going, you can't do that, don't use your skills. I know that you did a cool build, you can't use that here. That doesn't make it more interesting. And it all comes down to this. The design of the game is constantly pushing you away from the parts of the game that are fun. I like the defense system, but I don't want to only dodge and parry and jump and gradient counter when I boot the game up. I like how the characters play, so I wish the game didn't so often decide to just lock out large parts of their kit. I didn't even talk about shields and how there's a whole class of enemies that make most of your roster useless unless you use one of the like 3 abilities that let you strip shields off. And all of it comes down to the design of the game forcing you to spend time doing the not fun things. This game is obsessed with me spending most of my time with it doing the things that are not fun. And it hurts because the fun parts of this game are so good, and the story is engaging, and the world is a place I legitimately want to spend more time in. I think at Expedition 33-2 could solve a lot of this because the bones of the game are good, but the strongest elements of this game are being held back significantly by some bad game design decisions. The amount of time you have to spend in the menus during the exploration hurts your immersion. And the amount of time that fights take really hurts the tension in the game, especially of the mispleasure of ever dying to a chromatic enemy. So now you have to spend another 10 minutes pressing the R1 button. And worst of all these game features that kind of amount to padding end up hurting the story because it gets so spaced out. It's easy to forget why we even came to Cyrene. And in the end game, it's very easy to get completely divorced from the narrative and instead to be caught up with pressing the R1 button and messing with your pictos.